My husband's family treated me like the maid at every holiday dinner until I snapped. The first time I realized I wasn't really part of the family, it wasn't said out loud. It was Thanksgiving. We were at my husband Daniel's parents' house in Ohio, a big warm place that always felt colder than it looked. The kind of house where everything was decorated perfectly, but nothing felt relaxed. From the moment I walked in, I slipped into a role without being told. Not a guest, not a daughter-in-law, something in between, something useful. Could you help in the kitchen for a second? Daniel's mother, Linda, asked almost immediately after greeting me. It wasn't really a question. It never was. I nodded and followed her inside while the rest of the family stayed in the living room laughing, drinking, existing without effort. Inside the kitchen, there was already chaos, pots boiling, oven full, counter covered. Linda handed me a cutting board like it had been waiting for me. Just chop the vegetables, she said casually. I smiled politely. Of course, that was my first mistake, because after that, it became expected, not requested, expected. Over the next hour, I chopped, stirred, carried, wiped, and refilled things I didn't even know needed refilling. Meanwhile, Daniel's sister, Melissa, walked in twice, once to grab a drink, once to take a photo of the food prep for memories. She never offered help. No one asked her to. When I finally stepped out of the kitchen, the living room was already full of conversation again. Daniel looked up and smiled at me. Everything okay? Yeah, I said automatically. Just helping out. Linda overheard and added, she's a lifesaver in the kitchen. It sounded like praise, but it didn't feel like it, because nobody else had been asked to be a lifesaver. Dinner itself wasn't better. If anything, it made the pattern clearer. I set the table. I refilled drinks. I cleared plates before anyone else stood up. At one point, I realized I hadn't actually sat down and finished my own meal while it was warm. When I finally sat for a few minutes, Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, you don't have to do everything, you know. I gave a small smile. It's fine, but it wasn't fine. Not really. Because when I stopped moving for even a moment, I became invisible. The conversation shifted around me like I wasn't fully part of it, like I was temporarily off duty. After dinner, the helping didn't stop. There were dishes, then leftovers, then cleaning counters, and somehow, I was always the closest person to whatever needed doing next. At one point, Linda said, you're so good at this kind of thing. I laughed lightly. What kind of thing? You know, she said like it was obvious. Hosting. Taking care of everything. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't hosting. I wasn't even visiting. I was working. The first crack in me didn't come from anger. It came from realization. Later that night, when we finally left, I sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's car staring out the window. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Thanks for helping my mom, he said. I nodded slowly. Then, quietly, I said something I didn't fully understand yet myself. I didn't feel like a guest tonight. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I hesitated, because saying it out loud made it real. Felt like I was assigned something. Daniel didn't respond right away. He just kept driving. And I wondered if he had ever noticed, or if this was just how things had always been in his family. And I was the only one who thought it was strange. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was angry, because I was starting to notice a pattern I could never unsee again. And I had a feeling this wasn't a one-time thing. It was the beginning of something bigger, something I hadn't agreed to. Next, she starts noticing this isn't just holidays. It's every family interaction. After Thanksgiving, I told myself I was overthinking it. It's easy to dismiss something uncomfortable when you only have one example to point to. One bad day, one exhausting dinner, one chaotic kitchen. But then Christmas came, and the pattern didn't just repeat, it expanded. This time, we were at Daniel's aunt's house. Bigger gathering, more people, more noise, more expectations that no one ever actually spoke out loud. The moment we arrived, I noticed something familiar. Daniel got pulled into conversations immediately. Handshake greetings, back pats, laughing with his cousins. I stood beside him for maybe 10 seconds before someone else called his name and he was gone again. Not in a rude way, just naturally absorbed into his family, and I was left standing in the middle of it all like furniture that had been placed slightly off-center. Then it started. Could you help set up the drinks? Can you bring the extra plates from the kitchen? Do you mind just checking the oven? It wasn't one person, it was everyone. Not aggressively, not directly, just assuming like my presence automatically meant availability. I tried to ignore the feeling and did what I usually did. I helped, because helping feels easier than refusing when you don't want to seem difficult. But halfway through the evening, something shifted. I walked back into the kitchen after refilling glasses and found Daniel's cousin, Brooke, standing there scrolling on her phone while food was being arranged around her. She looked up and smiled. Oh good, you're back. I was wondering when you'd take over the oven stuff. I blinked. Take over? She nodded like it was obvious. Yeah, my mom said you were helping with the cooking. Helping. That word again. I glanced around the kitchen. No one else was doing anything. Just me. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. I thought everyone was just contributing, I said. Brooke laughed lightly. Well, you're just really good at it. And then she went back to her phone. That was the moment I started noticing something sharper. It wasn't just what they were asking me to do, it was how naturally they assumed I would do it, like it didn't require permission or appreciation or even awareness that it was happening. Later, I finally sat down for dinner, for real this time, but even then, it didn't feel like sitting with everyone else. It felt like I had returned from a shift. A few minutes later, Daniel leaned toward me. You've been busy all night, he said softly. I gave a small nod. That's okay, but I wasn't looking at him when I said it, because I was watching his family watching how no one else moved the way I did. No one else automatically stood up when something needed refilling. No one else checked anything without being asked. And yet, no one seemed to think that was strange. After dinner, the cleanup started again. I stood up out of habit, and this time, Daniel caught my wrist gently. "Hey," he said quietly. "Sit down." I looked at him, then at the kitchen, then back at him. "I should help," I said automatically. His expression changed slightly. Not angry, just confused. "No," he said. "You don't have to do all that." That word again. Have to. But I wasn't doing it because I had to. I was doing it because no one else would. Or worse, because no one else expected to. That night, when we were finally alone, I said something I hadn't fully formed in my mind yet. "I don't think your family sees me as a guest." Daniel sighed slightly. "They like you." That's not what I said. He paused, and I could tell he was trying to understand without getting defensive. Finally, he said, "Then what do you think they see you as?" I looked at him for a long moment. "I think they see me as the person who does things." Silence, not disagreement, not confirmation, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something uncomfortable again. This wasn't about being asked to help. It was about being assumed into a role I never agreed to, and no one else seemed to question it, except me. Next, she tries to stop helping, and discovers how quickly the family reacts when she doesn't. After Christmas, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not something I announced, just a quiet internal boundary. I wasn't going to automatically step into the helping role anymore, if I was really just a guest. I wanted to see what happened when I acted like one. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A few weeks later, Daniel's parents hosted a Sunday family lunch, small gathering. Less pressure, or so I thought. We arrived mid-morning, and almost immediately I noticed the shift in energy the moment I walked through the door. Linda greeted Daniel warmly first, as usual. Then me. Quick hug, polite smile, and then, almost instantly, "Could you help me in the kitchen for a bit?" I felt the old reflex rise up in me. Yes, of course. But I stopped myself, just for a second. And then I said, "Actually, I think I'll sit with everyone for a bit first." The pause that followed was subtle, but I felt it immediately. Linda blinked once. "Oh," she said. "Okay." Then she smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sure, take your time." I walked into the living room instead of the kitchen. Daniel noticed immediately. He leaned toward me. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "I just want to sit for a bit," he nodded, but I could tell he was watching me. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I stayed seated while everyone else moved around, and for the first time, I noticed how often work passed through that house like an invisible system. Drinks refilled by me, plates adjusted by me, small tasks that no one assigned. Officially, but somehow always landed in my direction. Except this time, I wasn't moving, and something started happening. At first, nothing, then small glances. Linda walked through the living room twice, each time slightly slower near me. Brooke passed by the couch and hesitated like she was expecting me to get up. Daniel's aunt opened the fridge, looked around, then glanced toward me. Still nothing. I stayed seated, and I felt it. The system didn't know what to do with me. Eventually, Linda came into the living room again. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone still polite, but tighter now. "Yes," I said. "I'm just relaxing." Another pause. Then she said, "We're just trying to get everything ready." "I know," I replied calmly. "It looks like you've got it handled." That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Not loudly, but enough that I noticed it. People started moving faster. Shorter conversations, more direct glances into the kitchen. Like my stillness was creating friction they weren't used to. Daniel came over again, quieter this time. "You don't have to prove a point," he said gently. I looked at him. "I'm not," I said. "I just want to see what happens when I'm not involved." He frowned slightly. "And what do you think is happening?" I glanced toward the kitchen. "I think everyone is, noticing I'm not filling the gaps anymore." He didn't respond right away because I think he was noticing it too. Lunch eventually got served, and for the first time, I didn't help set anything. I just sat down when everyone else did. It felt small, but it also felt noticeable. Too noticeable. After lunch, plates started piling up, and I waited. No one said my name, no one asked, but I could feel it building. That silent expectation that I would eventually get up anyway. I didn't. Instead, I stayed seated and talked with Daniel's cousin when she asked me a question. Normal conversation, but tension was growing in the background. Finally, Linda stood up and said, "I guess we'll start cleaning up." Her tone was polite, but something in it had changed. Less invitation, more distance. I stood up too, not to help, but to get water from the kitchen. And as I passed the sink, I saw it. The pile of dishes, already forming, and no one stepping toward it yet. Just hesitation, like they were recalculating a system that had always run on assumption. That night in the car, Daniel didn't say much at first. He just drove. Finally, he said, "You made things uncomfortable today." I nodded slightly. "I know." He looked over at me briefly. "That wasn't your intention?" "No," I said honestly. "My intention was to stop automatically disappearing into a role I never agreed to." Silence again. Longer this time. Then he said, "They're not used to things being different." I leaned my head back against the seat. "Neither was I said quietly, and that was the truth I hadn't said out loud before, because it wasn't just about what they expected from me. It was about how long I had been meeting expectations I never questioned until I finally did. Next, the family starts reacting directly to her boundaries, and Daniel is forced to choose whether he notices the pattern too. After that Sunday lunch, things didn't go back to normal. They shifted, not openly, not in a way anyone would admit, but I could feel it in how I was treated the next time we visited. It was Daniel's sister's birthday dinner, a smaller gathering but somehow more structured, like everyone had already discussed what what role I was expected to play before I even arrived. When we walked in, I noticed something immediately. No one said, "Could you help in the kitchen?" At first, I thought that was progress, but instead, I was met with something different, expectation without instruction. I sat down in the living room, and for the first time, nobody directly asked me to do anything, but the tasks still happened. Someone would mention needing drinks. A plate would be left on the table by accident near me. A comment would be made like, "Oh, I wish someone could just check the oven quickly." And then silence. Every time. Waiting. Not asking. Waiting. Daniel noticed too. He leaned toward me and whispered, "They're kind of circling it." I gave a small nod. "I see it," I said. But I stayed seated anyway, because I wanted to understand what changed when I stopped being the automatic answer. And the answer was discomfort, not confrontation. Discomfort. At one point, Daniel's mother, Linda, walked past me 3 times in under 10 minutes. The third time, she finally said it, not directly, not clearly, just enough to land. "It's funny," she said lightly, "how some people don't notice what needs to be done unless someone points it out." She smiled afterward, like it was harmless, like it wasn't aimed at anyone, but no one else was in the room. I looked up at her. Calmly. "That's true," I said. "People don't always notice expectations that aren't spoken out loud." Her smile tightened slightly. Daniel shifted in his seat. The air changed again. Not explosive, just sharper. After dinner, the plates sat on the table longer than usual. No one moved immediately, not because they didn't want to, but because the system wasn't running automatically anymore. Eventually, Daniel stood up. "I'll help clean up," he said. And for the first time, I saw something unusual in his family. Dynamic relief, like someone had restarted a paused process. I stayed seated, and nobody questioned it directly, but I could feel the shift in how I was being looked at, not as invisible, not as useful, but as deliberate, someone who had stepped outside the role. On the drive home, Daniel finally spoke. "They're not trying to use you," he said carefully. I looked out the window. "I didn't say they were trying," I replied. He went quiet, because that was the part he wasn't fully understanding yet. Intent wasn't the issue. Pattern was, and patterns don't require intention to exist. After a long pause, he said, "So what do you want me to do about it?" That question mattered, not because it solved anything, but because it showed he was starting to see it as something that required action, not explanation. I thought about it for a moment, then said, "I don't want you to fix them." He glanced at me. "I want you to notice it when it happens." Silence again, but different this time. Less defensive, more reflective. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, because I was realizing how long I had participated in something without naming it, how easily helping becomes expectation, and how quickly expectation becomes identity. And somewhere in that chain, I had stopped being a guest a long time ago without ever agreeing to become anything else. The next morning, Daniel got a text from his sister. I saw his expression change as he read it. He didn't show it to me, but he didn't hide it either. And I already knew what it was about. Something had been said, not directly, not openly, but enough for the system to respond again. And this time, I wasn't sure if I was just noticing the pattern or becoming the problem in it. Next, the tension turns explicit for the first time, and the family finally confronts her directly about helping. The text changed everything, not because it was dramatic, because it made something unspoken suddenly official. Daniel didn't show it to me right away, but I saw the way his jaw tightened as he read it a second time in the kitchen that evening. He kept his phone face down after that, like putting it away would reset the situation. It didn't. We were supposed to attend a small family dinner that weekend. Nothing major, just casual family time, which in his family usually meant the same structure, just with fewer people watching. On the drive there, Daniel was quieter than usual. At one point he said, "My sister thinks you were making a statement last time." I didn't look at him immediately. "What kind of statement?" I asked. He hesitated. "That you were refusing to help on purpose." There it was. Finally, the interpretation had been named. I nodded slowly. I wasn't making a statement. I was sitting. He exhaled through his nose, like he was trying to stay neutral in a conversation that already had weight. "I know that," he said, "but they didn't take it that way." That line hung in the car for a few seconds, longer than it should have, because it wasn't about misunderstanding, it was about expectation, and deviation from expectation always gets labeled as intention. When we arrived, I could feel it immediately. Not hostility, not warmth, something more structured, like the atmosphere had been briefed. Linda greeted us first, as usual, but this time her smile didn't fully settle when she saw me. Dinner started normally enough, too normally. That was the problem. No requests, no assumptions, spoken out loud, just observation waiting. Stayed seated the entire time, and I could feel it building again in subtle ways. Dish left slightly too long on the table. A glance toward the kitchen that wasn't followed by movement. A comment like, "It's nice when everything just gets done without needing to ask." No names attached, but no need for them either. After dinner, Daniel's sister Melissa finally spoke directly. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly enough that the room went quieter. "I think there's been some confusion lately," she said, looking between Daniel and me. Daniel straightened slightly. "What kind of confusion?" Melissa smiled faintly, but it wasn't warm. "About contribution," she said. "And expectations." There it was, the word they had been circling for weeks. Contribution. She continued, "We're just used to everyone helping out when they come over. It's never been an issue before." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense," I said. Then I added calmly, "But I think there's a difference between helping when needed and being assigned responsibility by habit." A quiet pause followed. Linda spoke next, her tone still polite but but sharper at the edges. We've never assigned anything, she said. I met her eyes. I know, I replied. That's kind of the point. That landed, because it clarified something nobody had been willing to name. Expectation doesn't need assignment. It just needs repetition. Daniel looked between all of us now, clearly uncomfortable but not interrupting. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to pick a side. He was trying to understand both realities at once. Melissa leaned back slightly. So what exactly are you saying? I took a breath. I'm saying I noticed I was always the one stepping into tasks no one else was being asked to do. And when I stopped, it created tension. That's all. No accusation. Just observation, but observation can feel like accusation when it interrupts a system. Linda's expression tightened. Slightly. That's not how we see it, she said. I nodded. I understand that. And I did. Because from inside their system, nothing had changed. But from inside mine, everything had. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't chaotic either. It was the kind of silence that happens when something unspoken finally gets spoken, and nobody knows what to do with it yet. After a few minutes, Daniel stood up. I think we should head out, he said gently. No one argued. That surprised me. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for a while. The road stretched out in front of us, quiet and steady. Finally, Daniel said, "You didn't have to say it like that." I looked out the window. I didn't say anything harsh, I replied. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. He nodded slowly. I know, he said. Another pause. Then he added, they're going to need time to adjust. I turned slightly toward him, and I already gave them time. I said quietly. That was the first time I felt it. Clearly. Not anger, not resentment, just clarity, because I had already lived through the adjustment period. I just hadn't named it until now when we got home. Daniel went straight to the kitchen and opened the fridge, then closed it again without taking anything out. I didn't realize it felt like that for you, he said. I leaned against the counter. I don't think it started that way, I replied. It became that way without anyone noticing. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, he didn't try to explain it away. He just accepted that it was real. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, not replaying the argument, just thinking about how invisible roles form in families, how quickly they become normal, and how uncomfortable it feels when someone finally stops playing the role no one ever officially gave them, because then the system has to reveal itself, and once it's visible, it can't be unseen. Next, Daniel begins to question his own family's patterns, and the emotional pressure shifts from her to the entire household. After that dinner, something subtle changed between Daniel and me, not in a bad way, more like a shift in awareness that neither of us could unsee again. He started noticing things he used to overlook, not dramatically, not constantly, but enough that I could tell his perception of his family was no longer automatic. A few days later, his mother invited us for a casual Sunday visit. Daniel asked me before we went, "Do you want me to say something if it starts again?" I looked at him for a moment. "No," I said. "Just notice it." He nodded, and that was it. When we arrived, everything looked normal on the surface. Coffee ready, snacks out, light conversation already flowing. But underneath it, I could feel the same structure forming again. Within 20 minutes, someone mentioned food prep. Not to me, not directly, just in general. I guess someone will need to start getting things ready soon. No name, no instruction. Just air left open for someone to fill. I stayed seated. Daniel stayed seated, too. That alone changed the rhythm. A few minutes later, Linda stood up herself and went into the kitchen. That had never happened before. Not like this. Not without prompting. Daniel leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "She's adjusting already." I nodded. She has to. The system can't run on assumptions if no one is responding to them. He looked at me for a moment, like he was still processing what that meant. For the first time, I think he was seeing the invisible labor clearly. Not just mine, but everyone's expectations of it. Later, Melissa joined us and sat across from me. There was a different energy this time, more direct, less passive. So, she said, "Are we doing this new thing now where no one helps unless they're asked?" I met her eyes calmly. "No," I said. "I think we're doing the thing where people only do what they choose to do instead of what they assume they'll be assigned." She smiled slightly, but it didn't hold warmth. "That sounds complicated." "It's actually simpler," I replied. "It just feels unfamiliar." Daniel stayed quiet beside me, but I could feel him listening more carefully now, not just to words, to dynamics. After a pause, Melissa said, "It's just strange. We never had issues before." I nodded. "I believe that," I said. "But I think what you're calling no issues might have just been a pattern no one questioned." That landed harder than I intended, not because it was aggressive, but because it was accurate enough to sit uncomfortably. The rest of the visit passed without direct confrontation, but I noticed something important before we left. No one asked me to help with anything, not once. And yet, no one filled the gaps as quickly as before either. It was slower, less automatic, more conscious. On the drive home, Daniel finally spoke. "I think they're starting to notice how much they relied on assumptions," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." He glanced at me briefly, "And I think I am too." That surprised me slightly, so I turned toward him. "In what way?" He hesitated. "Not just about them asking you to help," he said, "but about how often you just did it without anyone realizing it had become your job in the first place." I didn't respond immediately, because that was the first time he had articulated it that clearly. Not blame awareness. That night, I thought about something I hadn't fully processed before. It wasn't just their expectations that had built this system. It was also my willingness to meet them without questioning why they existed. Not because I was wrong, but because it was easier than challenging something that didn't have words yet. Later Later, Daniel came into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I talked to my sister, he said quietly. I looked up. He continued, she thinks you're trying to change the family dynamic on purpose. I exhaled slowly. And what do you think? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, which was new. Finally, he said, I think you're just the first person who stopped doing something everyone else benefited from without noticing. That sentence stayed in the room longer than anything else had that day, because it wasn't judgment, it was recognition. And recognition changes things more than conflict ever does. After he went to sleep, I stayed awake for a while, not angry, not frustrated, just aware that the moment you stop participating in an unspoken system, you don't just change your role, you change how the system sees itself, and that always comes with resistance before understanding. I just didn't know yet which one would come first. Next, the tension reaches a breaking point when the family directly confronts Daniel about choosing sides. The confrontation didn't happen at a dinner table this time. It came through Daniel, not in person, in a phone call. We were at home when his phone rang late in the evening. I noticed the shift in his expression before I heard anything he said. He walked into the hallway to take it, but the house was quiet enough that I could still catch fragments. His tone stayed calm at first, then firmer, then quieter again, like he was trying not to escalate something he didn't fully agree with. When he came back, he didn't sit down immediately. He just stood there for a moment, holding his phone. That was my mom, he said. I nodded slowly. Okay, he exhaled. They think I'm letting things get uncomfortable on purpose. I didn't respond right away, because that wasn't surprising anymore. It was predictable. And? I asked finally. He looked at me more directly now. They think you're influencing the whole dynamic. A pause. Then he added, they want me to address it. That word again. Address. As if this was something broken that needed correction. I sat down slowly. And what did you say? I asked. Daniel hesitated. I told them I'm not going to correct how you choose to participate, he said carefully. That surprised me, slightly. Not because he defended me, but because he framed it as choice, not behavior. He continued, I told them you're not refusing to help. You're just not assuming it's your role anymore. Silence followed. Not tense, just heavy with awareness. Then he added something quieter, and they didn't like that answer. I almost smiled, but didn't. Of course they didn't, I said softly. Because what they were really reacting to wasn't the help itself. It was the loss of automatic compliance. The next day, Linda called me directly. That was new. I didn't answer immediately when I saw her name on the screen. Daniel noticed. You don't have to pick up, he said. I looked at him. I know, but I did anyway. Hello, I said. Her voice was polite at first. Too polite. Hi, she said. I wanted to check in with you about something. I waited. She continued. I feel like there's been some misunderstanding recently about expectations during family gatherings. I stayed calm. I don't think there's a misunderstanding, I said. I think there's just a difference in what's expected versus what's assumed. A pause. Then she said, we've always just worked as a family. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. I believe you, I said. But I think I was contributing in ways that became expected instead of appreciated. Her tone tightened slightly. That was never our intention. I understand, I replied. But intention and impact aren't always the same thing. Silence again. Longer this time. When she spoke again, it was softer but more direct. Daniel feels like you're pulling away from the family. That sentence landed differently because now it wasn't about dishes or kitchens. It was about belonging. I took a breath. I'm not pulling away, I said. I'm just not stepping into a role I never agreed to anymore. Another pause. Then Linda said something that felt more emotional than anything before. Then what are we supposed to do? And for the first time, I realized something important. They weren't just frustrated. They were uncertain because the system they relied on had stopped running automatically. Answered carefully, I think you'll have to start noticing what needs to be done instead of assuming someone will always do it. She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, that sounds like a lot of work. And I almost laughed because that was the point. It had always been a lot of work. It just hadn't been distributed evenly. After the call ended, Daniel stood in the kitchen watching me. What did she say? He asked. I set the phone down. She asked what they're supposed to do now, I said. He frowned slightly. And? I looked at him. I told her the truth, I said, that they'll have to start seeing the work instead of assuming it disappears. Daniel nodded slowly, then said something I didn't expect. They're going to take time to accept that. I replied, they already had time. That wasn't anger. It was clarity. Because from my side, this wasn't new. It was just newly visible to them. That evening, I noticed something different in Daniel, not discomfort, awareness. He wasn't caught between sides anymore. He was starting to see the structure itself. And structures don't collapse immediately when exposed. They resist. They adjust or they break slowly, and I didn't know yet which direction this one would go, but I knew one thing for sure there was no going back to how it used to be. Next, the final confrontation happens in person, and the family forces a direct conversation that changes everything. The final confrontation didn't feel like a movie moment. There was no shouting, no dramatic entrance, no one storming out. It was quieter than that, almost ordinary. Daniel's parents invited us over one last time that month. They called it talking things through properly. That phrase alone told me everything. This wasn't a casual dinner anymore. It was a meeting. When we arrived, the house felt different, not warmer, more controlled, like everyone had prepared what they were going to say in advance and just hadn't said it yet. We sat in the living room first. No food, no distractions, just people facing each other. Linda started. I think we need to clear something up, she said, looking between Daniel and me. Daniel stayed quiet, but I felt him shift slightly beside me. I feel like there's been tension, she continued, and it's it's affecting the family, Melissa added quickly. It feels like we can't even ask for simple help anymore without it becoming a problem. I listened without interrupting, because this was the first time they were saying it directly. Finally, I nodded slowly. I understand why it feels that way, I said. That surprised them a little, because I wasn't arguing, I wasn't defending, I was acknowledging. Then I continued, but I think what you're calling help is actually expectation that no one noticed was assigned to one person. Linda frowned slightly. No one assigned anything. I met her eyes. That's exactly it, I said calmly. It wasn't assigned. It just kept landing on me. Silence followed. Daniel spoke for the first time that night. She's not wrong, he said. That changed the room. Instantly. Not because it was aggressive, but because it confirmed something they were hoping he wouldn't say out loud. Melissa looked at him. So what, you're saying we were using her? Daniel shook his head. No, he said carefully. I think we were all just used to something and didn't realize it had a cost. That softened the edges slightly, but not enough. Linda leaned forward a bit. So what do we do now? She asked again. Almost the same question she had asked me on the phone. I answered honestly. You stop expecting one person to automatically step into everything, I said. And you start noticing when something needs to be done instead of waiting for the same person to do it. Melissa let out a small breath. That still feels like you're changing how we've always done things, she said. Nodded. Yes, I replied. Because how it's always been wasn't balanced. That sentence hung in the room longer than anything else. Not because it was harsh, because it was undeniable. Daniel's father finally spoke, quieter than the rest. We never meant for it to be like that. I believed him, but I also knew it didn't change what it became. I understand that, I said gently, but I can't keep living inside a pattern just because it was unintentional. That was the turning point, not anger, not agreement, just acceptance that things had changed and wouldn't go back. The conversation ended without resolution, no perfect agreement, no emotional closure, just understanding that things would be different moving forward. On the drive home, no one spoke for a while. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. I stared out the window. Finally, he said, "That was hard." I nodded. Yeah, he paused, but I think they heard you this time. I turned slightly toward him. I wasn't trying to make them hear me, I said. I was just done pretending it wasn't happening. He nodded slowly, then said something quieter. I should have seen it earlier. I replied gently, "You're seeing it now. That matters more than being first." When we got home, the house felt different too. Not because anything physical had changed, but because something internal had settled. No more guessing, no more automatic roles, no more silent expectations, filling every gap, just awareness and space. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone, not because I was avoiding anything, but because for the first time, I could stand there without feeling like I was supposed to start doing something. Daniel joined me after a while. He leaned against the counter and said, "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about it honestly. No, I said, but I do wish I had noticed it sooner. He nodded. I think we all do. There was a pause. Then he added, "It feels like things will be different now." I looked at him. They already are, I said, because the truth was simple. Nothing explosive had happened. No one had been defeated. No one had won. But a pattern had been seen clearly, enough that it couldn't quietly run in the background anymore. And once that happens, life doesn't go back. It moves forward. And this time I wouldn't be disappearing into it.